welcome back to The Short Game. This is a show about short video games that respect your time. I'm Reagan Kelly, and this week I'm joined by just one awesome co-host / bro-host. Shane, how are you doing?
I'm awesome.
Agreed. And this week we're doing a little bit of a sort of abridged or mini episode because this week we've had some situations arise that has meant that we haven't been able to operate on our normal schedule. But a game came out very recently here that we wanted to talk a little bit about, and that is Erica, which was a surprise release on the PlayStation 4. It came out during Gamescom, so if, for the Americans in the audience who aren't familiar, Gamescom, and I mean, hey, that's me, and I only barely know this stuff. Gamescom is the biggest game convention or sort of event that happens yearly in Europe. Think PAX, but bigger. And so a lot of the game companies like to have big releases or announcements at Gamescom, and one of the ones that Sony announced was that, oh, hey, and we're announcing and also releasing a game today, and it was Erica. It's a FMV game, which is a thing that that it seemed to be having a bit of a moment. I mean, see last week's episode with Telling Lies, which we all really liked.
Yes, awesome game.
And this is a different kind of FMV game. First of all, of course, it's on consoles, or specifically one console. This is a PS4 exclusive, but it's a bit of a different kind of thing. So I thought it would be interesting to talk about it as a bit of a contrast piece to Telling Lies, which we talked about last week.
Yeah, so last week we covered Telling Lies, which is this, I can kind of consider the new breed of FMV game. And I can't remember who said this on Twitter, but I thought it was really funny. Calling these games FMV games really kind of calls out this thing that used to be really high tech, and used to really set these games apart. The fact that they had full motion video. Mm-hmm. And today, is it impressive to be able to show video inside of your video game? I no longer think so.
I mean, essentially every game since the PlayStation has had that, right? Like it's entirely bog stock standard. And so saying FMV game, it now feels a little more just like, it doesn't just mean your game has full motion video captured with a real camera. What it means is your game has only full motion video captured with a real camera. It's kind of a different meaning than it had back then.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of has this meaning of a film game. And for our listeners who kind of maybe haven't played a lot of these games because A, there's not a lot of them, and B, they mostly suck, so they're mostly very avoidable. The history of them, most people, if you are aware of some of them, are aware of maybe Night Trap, which is god-awful, and it is a game in which you watch sorority girls be killed by vampires and press a button in order to stop vampires. I think some of the vampires are ninjas. I could be wrong about that. And then there's games like, my only game that I ever actually had in this genre was on the Sega Saturn, which was the game Double Switch, which famously was incredibly praised by Electronic Gaming Monthly, who gave it a 6 out of 10 and said, it's like Night Trap, but a little more involving.
I mean, I'll give it a little more credit than that, Shane. It starred Debbie Harry and I think it's Corey Haim. Like it had a cast, right? Like of like people who were interesting. Debbie Harry being in your FMV game was kind of a get back then.
Yes, Corey Haim and Debbie Harry and nobody else whose name I know. But I mean, casting is important in this kind of game. Casting is now getting to be really important in a lot of video games where you have
Keanu's here.
Oh, Keanu's here, and or the what's this Death Stranding, where basically they want every character to be a 1-for-1 pixel perfect recreation of the actor and all this stuff, right? So that this kind of thing is getting to be important to games, of course. But it was kind of weird back then. You would never have cared who. I certainly in the days when Double Switch came out in when was that? 90s, 94, I think, 93, 94.
Sounds right.
I would never have cared about who the voice was in my video game or anything like that. I don't think even in 93, 94, I knew who Debbie Harry or Corey Haim were. So maybe
I don't think I did either.
Maybe the people who bought the game for me knew who those people were. I don't know. I love Debbie Harry now. Not so. I have no strong feelings one way or the other about Corey Haim.
I think seeing Debbie Harry on the box might be the only explanation for somebody picking up this game. I still have no idea how this came into our possession. I assume some well-meaning adult in our lives went into a video game store and was like, my boys have a Sega Saturn. What's a good game for them?
Oh, well, this one's got Corey Haim.
Oh, yeah, It is Corey Haim. International star of stage and screen. So yeah, that was a genre, and then it sort of disappeared. And then in the modern era, the FMV game has been kind of making a comeback. And the thing is that almost kind of bothers me, and now we're doing it, so I understand where this comes from. But like, if you look up a review for Erica, for Telling Lies, for Her Story, for literally any game that makes heavy use of FMV that comes out today, all of them have at the very least a subtitle that says something along the lines of FMV games, they're back, and now they're good. And I mean, first of all, I kind of take issue with that in some cases. Not all of them are good, but some of them. But like the fact that they are back, they've been coming back. They've been back for at least 5 years now, right? So it feels like the shine is off of that rose. It's a little bit less surprising.
Is that a phrase? The shine is off of that rose?
You don't shine your... I screwed it up probably, but I don't care. So the something is off of something else, and it's not... The fact that a game comes out that is an FMV game doesn't necessarily make me interested. What made me interested enough to pick up and play Erica isn't that it has live actors and filmed scenes. It's, I mean, this is the short game. It's the fact that games that are made in this style are almost by necessity going to be short. People don't tend to make 40-hour FMV games. Because that would be a monstrous undertaking that, I mean, it's not happening. So, my ears perked up basically because I knew this would be a short, manageable game, and would have a sort of a sit down for a movie-like experience. So that this game, Erica, definitely accomplishes that. Probably a lot more, I'd say, than Telling Lies. It feels like I'm going to sit down in front of my television and use my phone to control it, which is a thing.
Yeah, that was a surprise to me. Actually, that was kind of I had two big annoyances getting started in this game. The first was that after downloading and installing it, which was, I believe, 40 gigabytes.
Yep.
It took a very long time.
HD video, guys.
You got it. My PS4 would not launch it, and then I had to delete it and reinstall it in order to get it running. I'm sure that is just idiosyncratic to my PS4, but it was annoying. And then I had, upon launching it, I had no warning ahead of time that I was going to have to use my phone to control it. And of course, at that moment, my phone decided to crap out on me. So I had several things throw up annoying barriers to entry for this game. Those of you who are out there, make sure you do some of that due diligence of installing the companion app and making sure you download this game well in advance. It's big. I have no idea how a game that you can play for about 5 hours and be done with it.
I think it's less. I think this is probably like a 3-hour experience. I didn't actually time it, so I'm not 100% sure about that, but real short.
But justifies the storage space being larger than Destiny 2, which is otherwise my other largest game on my PS4. So yeah, be aware.
So we haven't even actually really talked too much yet about what the game actually is. So maybe we should take a second and do that. Erica is, we mentioned it's an FMV game, obviously, but the way that it plays out is very similar to Telltale games. Except of course that rather than walking around or what have you, you're making choices in the real-time FMV. So some of those are QuickTime events and some of those are narrative choices, all of which have a sort of a timer on them in a very Telltale Games kind of way. And the description, and I will say right here that if you want to go into this game completely unspoiled, that the description...
I actually would recommend that if you're into it.
Yeah, if you're into it. The description on the store page on the PS4 has what I would regard as a spoiler in the first sentence, even like within the first 10 words. So which I'm about to talk about right now. So if you're not interested in that, we're going to try to keep this as spoiler-free as possible, but maybe go ahead and skip forward about 30 seconds right now. So the game, the store describes it, the PS4 store describes it with enter a dangerous and shadowy world of murder and cultists. That's the spoiler I was referring to, which I'm surprised that they put right on the box. In this pioneering interactive thriller exclusive to PS4 that asks you to reach into the game world and take control of the narrative. So what it's talking about there is that that essentially in terms of how this game feels, at least for me, it felt sort of like sitting down to watch an episode of a British thriller that I wasn't familiar with. And at various points throughout the episode of this British thriller, TV thriller, it does not quite, I think, rise to the level of film-like experience. It feels very much like a prestige television show to me. That's probably the way that I perceived it. But anyway, at various points during this prestige television show, you're going to be asked to do things like, and it's quite often, about every 30 seconds or so throughout the course of the game, you're going to need to do something interactive. And
this is something where Sony seems to have a real love of the idea of connecting your phone to your game console to use it as a controller. There's this entire idea of Sony PlayLink. Have you played any of the PlayLink games, Reagan?
I tried one of them a while ago and not deeply, and I don't even, it slid right off of my brain. I don't remember anything
so there's quite a few of them. There's things like Knowledge is Power is one I know of. It's like a quiz game. There's a SingStar. There's quite a few of these at this point. And basically the idea with these games is most of them are party games where the people in your party are going to pull their phones out and each one presumably download the PlayLink app and connect it to the PlayStation 4 and then, snap a photo of their face, swipe the screen, do different stuff, basically. Sing into their phone, using your smartphone as a microphone, for example.
And, it seems like a smart thing to do, considering that, probably the biggest barrier to, mass market approachability for the PlayStation 4 is the fact that there's a pretty significant number of people out there who aren't comfortable with the kind of game controller that the PlayStation 4 comes with by default, but everybody has a phone and everybody's comfortable with touchscreens. It seems like a smart idea.
Yes. However, the kind of people that aren't comfortable using a controller certainly aren't going to have a PS4. And so these kinds of games are always going to be relegated
I think you might be wrong. They might not be the primary owner of a PS4, but they're going to, it's very likely that they might have a PS4 in their household.
Yeah, I suppose you might be right. But I mean, it is always going to be relegated to a kind of secondary experience. It's not the reason that people are going to be getting a PS4. And it's also, I don't really think, going to be increasing people's comfortability with using a PS4, just assuming, because they're not going to be using the primary way of interacting with that PS4. So, I get the idea. I just don't see it really taking off. I haven't ever really seen.
Well, it's been around now for quite a while, and so you've been basically. I mean, I don't know how well those things sell with any actual accuracy, but I think you're basically right. I don't think they've been lighting the world on fire. And the games of that sort that I think do pretty well are things that are multi-platform, like the Jackbox games, where it doesn't matter that there's some special Sony technology for this. You just log into a web page on your phone.
Yeah,
and
also
works fine.
That's another thing, that the barrier to entry. Surely today, the barrier to entry of downloading and installing an app is not that high. Most people are doing it. However, they are trying to hit, for these things, a really broad audience. People are still kind of resistant to downloading and using one-time use applications. If you're over at a friend's house and you want to play music on their stereo, but you have to download an app to do it, are you really going to do it, or are you going to say, just give me your phone, I'll try and find the song? So I think this kind of PlayLink thing has the same kind of challenges. I kind of was annoyed when I realized I was supposed to download an app in order to play this game.
Well, you actually can play this entirely with a DualShock 4, and I played through it both ways. I played through this game basically 1.5 times. And so I played a pretty significant amount of this game with the DualShock 4 as well, and I found it actually fine. I've seen some reviews where folks were complaining about this on DualShock 4s. I think it is probably more designed around the experience of using the app, and I thought the app was fine. It didn't bother me that I needed to download and install it. It connected really easily. I didn't need to create an account or any BS like that. And once it was connected, it worked pretty much the way you expect, and I thought it worked great. Using the touchpad on the PS4 controller was a pretty similar experience. This is really designed for you to be looking at the screen, and you're using the touchpad for gestures that feel really natural. And I didn't find that I needed to look at my phone, for example. And so because of that, having the just trackpad touchpad on the gamepad also works just fine for this game. So either way that you go, I think it's fine. It's more just the types of interactions that you're having with this. There's sort of breakdown into two sort of categories. One would be that there are sort of moment-to-moment interactions that I think are just there to try to involve you in the story on a minute-to-minute basis. Things like Erica, the title character, is walking through a door and needs to unlock it, and suddenly there's a very tight close-up of the lock, and you need to do a little gesture on your touchpad or phone in order to unlock the lock. And then there's the other type of interaction, which is things like quick time events or choices. Yeah. And most of those choices are, sometimes they're simple, yes/no choices or about dialogue. But sometimes there's as many as 6 or even 8 options for you to choose from, particularly towards the end of the game when the choices become more consequential. And they're presented by kind of giving you these sort of floating word clouds on screen for you to choose from. And there's a sort of a subtle timer element of them where there's a sort of... It's subtle, but they look like they're sort of dissolving. So you need to choose them before they fully dissolve.
Yeah. There's always the option to not make a choice. And then for the most part, the title character, Erica, does nothing, which in itself is, it's an interaction to just sit there and stand there and do nothing.
Yeah. And so all of these types of interactions, if you've played a Telltale game since The Walking Dead, it's going to be really familiar. Lee could always just stand there and say nothing. And sometimes people would say, wow, that Lee, he's a psychopath. He doesn't say a word. And that's pretty much how this plays out too. So not a lot of surprises from the gameplay's perspective here. So what this game has going for it is beautifully shot. It looks really, really nice most of the time. They've done some really interesting stuff with the lighting. If you look at the poster or the store page, you'll see this really dramatically sort of, Dayglow Outrun style lighting on a very beautiful actress's face. And that's the kind of vibe that they're going for with a lot of the visuals in the game. So
I think we can talk a lot more about these kind of interactions before we hit the spoiler break, because I have a lot to complain about there.
Okay, yeah, let's do. Go ahead.
The biggest issue that I have with this game is that in what the actual gameplay, how the actual gameplay works, this takes a veer away from almost every other FMV game which I've played, which are either choice-based narrative style stuff, her story style, investigative stuff, or hit the switch at the right time, double switch,
Dragon's Lair type of
Dragon's Lair kind of things. Mm-hmm. This really is doing its best to present you with kind of a lightweight version of adventure game style gameplay, right? Mm-hmm. Which means that a huge amount of the actual gameplay in this game has to do with opening drawers and doors and finding keys and looking at pictures and identifying numbers and doing a lot of wandering around and stuff like that, right? So first off, we're already kind of combining two genres that feel kind of at cross purposes. Because one of the great things about an FMV game is this kind of real, living story that just sort of plays on. And if you either hit the button to drop the guy in the trap or you don't. It's live action.
And built on top of that, like something that always stuck with me from when I talked to Sam Barlow years ago about her story was he said, well, I've got the best eye shaders and the best skin textures and everything that you could possibly have when you've got a live actor. And that's really something. Like visually, FMV games have this massive leg up in terms of realism because there's nothing realer than real. When Jamie came in and wanted, Jamie and I played through this largely together, which is a good way to play these sorts of games. It gives you kind of somebody to bounce thoughts off of as you're going through the story. And when she first sat down, she was like, "Oh, are these real actors? These aren't real actors." I think it was something about the lighting that was like made her think that it was just like the most high-tech, super good-looking render of a human face that has ever been done. And it took her a couple of minutes to convince herself that it was actual actors because, I don't know, something about it made her think that it was a high production value 3D game, which of course it's not. But anyway, I don't know what I meant to really get at there other than that, like, one of the big benefits here is that it looks good. It can potentially
what I was getting at with the adventure game kind of interaction is, like I was saying, it's kind of at cross purposes because adventure games want you to slow down and think and solve puzzles, which is not something that really works well when you're like literally playing back a pre-recorded thing. You're not going to have that kind of time to sit and think. So what you're left with is the most mundane interactions of the adventure game genre, which is clicking to walk around and opening doors and turning keys, which they kind of try to really hone in on that by having this, I guess, innovative control scheme where you're, if every time they ask you to turn a key, you're making a semicircle with your thumb on your phone. But that wears thin really fast. And especially when, at least was my experience, trying to, flip open a lighter or turn a key, you try it the first time and maybe you only turn the key 3/4 of the way and it just like turns itself back and now you've got to swipe again. Which that happened to me again and again in a just progressively more and more frustrating ways.
I think I agree. And if it's not already obvious, I think that Shane and I were both a little cool on this game. And I think a big part of it was that, like, I don't feel like the every few moments interactions that were not like meaningful interactions really added anything to my experience versus just literally watching a film. If you're watching a film, you don't usually have interruptions every few seconds to give you a tight close-up on some tiny manual detail that a character is doing with their hands. Characters walk through doors, and you usually don't even show the process of how they got that door open, and that's for good reason. That part is boring. Nobody cares. And so I don't really love that part of it, just as I don't really love that in something like a Telltale game, although in a Telltale game, it feels more natural to be there because it's not full motion video. It's not an interruption in something that's playing out.
Even in a Telltale game, you're not clicking to turn every doorknob.
Well, some of their earlier ones, you actually do kind of a lot of that kind of thing. They actually kind of, that stuff sort of fell away as things went along. But I remember that being one of my complaints about some games like The Walking Dead, was at times it felt like you had to do a lot of that sort of like a manual little tiny interactions to do simple things that felt a little silly. Anyway, the other type of interaction in this, though, is the larger choice-based stuff. And there we're talking just about like making choices about the narrative. That's the promise of something like this, right? So the promise of a game like this is that this is going to be like a good movie, but with many points within it where you can make choices about how the action is going to play out. And this game does accomplish that to a large degree. So for me, that stuff from a mechanics perspective actually works. Their way of presenting it was good, and the choices are mostly meaningful. So where things really sort of fell down for me is that I didn't particularly enjoy the story, which is unfortunately going to have to be something I'm going to talk about in more detail after the spoiler break. But we can talk for a minute just about sort of the mechanics of how it presents the sort of story choices, and also how the how it handles having consequential choices and branching.
The basics of how it presents these choices is it's going to throw up it's going to give you a moment of pause where, some character has asked Erica a question, and now Erica sees, you'll see a close up on Erica's face. And I have to take a moment right now and just say that this actress, at first I thought it was Emilia Clarke.
I kind of did too. It's not. Yeah.
She looks similar to me, mainly in the fact that her and Emilia Clarke both share these incredibly expressive, thick, bushy eyebrows.
Oh yeah.
If you're an eyebrow fan, this game might add a couple of points to this review score that we're providing you. So, but yeah, you'll get this nice, quick close up in which she furrows those big, bushy eyebrows and considers what she should say next. And you're then presented with things, words around her head. And the words around her head will be things like, maybe, I agree, I disagree. And then, of course, you can also do nothing. And, that's going to choose the next shot you see, in which she'll give a brief response. And then the story will kind of carry on. I only got through this game, I didn't do a second playthrough, so I don't know how different everything gets. You could probably answer this a little bit more.
Yeah, I can answer it a little bit. And I will also say that, like, in addition to sort of dialogue choices, which are a large part of this sort of choice, sometimes it has quite consequential choices about like what scene will play out next. So a very early game example that I don't feel is spoilery is that Erica is in a large, creepy mansion type house building, and she's alone. She's at a sort of a greeting or front desk. And there's a phone on the desk, and then off in the distance, a person walks by that looks really mysterious. And there's a moment where the phone also begins to ring, and you have to choose, is Erica going to chase after that strange-looking person at the end of the hall, or answer the phone that's ringing right next to her? And it's a fairly consequential choice. Things kind of branch and then re-merge in terms of how the story plays out quite a bit, particularly at the beginning. It has a lot more heavy branching towards the end, but at the beginning, these sorts of things are little rivulets that flow off of the main river of the story and then back in. But they have consequences, and so that is I think a success. It does give you the option to see different scenes play out depending on, the choices that you make, and it starts letting you make those choices really early in the game. And I don't know. I think it's to its credit. I don't think it's like revolutionary or anything, but I think it does a pretty good job with those. The dialogue choices felt a little less consequential, but they're still something to help keep you involved and help let you sort of characterize Erica the way that you want.
Anytime I've played a game that has this kind of branching story, choice-based narratives, I have always felt a little bit like it's easy to look behind the kind of magician's curtain, so to speak. Like if I think back to some of the first things I've seen like this, which would be the books of choose your own adventure stories. Once you actually started flipping through and reading those and you'd see pretty quickly that, they would pepper in a few choices that would kill you. They would pepper in a couple of choices, usually at the end of the story, that would lead to different endings. But for the most part, what you're picking is like which hallway you walk down on the way to the big choice that matters. And it's really hard to imagine designing a narrative structure that doesn't totally work this way. So, we have played games like I guess, that are more quality based than kind of choice based or kind of attribute based. 80 Days comes to mind, where you can have these like wildly different experiences based on, incredibly consequential, very early choices, and then see essentially nothing of the same story. But for something in FMV, it really doesn't work that way. It really doesn't work.
Yeah, every choice you add is going to add a whole bunch of days of additional shooting where you've got to hire, all the actors and a cameraman and all that stuff, and so expensive. It's not a cheap thing to add additional content that no one sees. Yeah, so I think we are going to have a discussion of the game post spoiler break, and that's where I think I can talk a little bit about my feelings on the story. A totally spoiler-free reaction here. I think the game has a story that I think the story of the game left me a little cold, and this might be personal taste because the pitch that I originally heard on this story, which had me interested in the story, was, and I don't think this is too much of a spoiler because it's in the first couple of scenes, that this is a game about a girl whose father was killed under mysterious circumstances. When she was young, she saw the event happen. A few years later, with his mystery never having been solved, she receives a package in the mail and it has a severed hand in it. And this begins a mystery of who is this killer and what is going on with that, whose hand was this, etc. And so my thought initially was, this sounds like it's going to be a cool police thriller drama, right? But that's not really the story that this game was interested in telling. This game was the game almost immediately takes you to a mental institution, and a large part of the story is concerned with Erica's mental state. How much of the weird stuff that's going on is or isn't real, it is. There's a lot of sort of occultish stuff going on in it. And it became a story that I wasn't particularly interested in. Now, maybe that's a taste issue, because I find that, for example, stories set in mental institutions and stories in which all of the central mystery of the story is the main character, my POV character, sane? I don't find those very interesting.
However, if you are a big fan of psychological thrillers, maybe your favorite movie is Shutter Island. This might be something that's more for you than, and in that case, maybe dive in and write into us and let us know what you think.
Yeah, and I'm curious to hear what this game has gotten really mixed reviews. Some of them are very positive, and some of them are more cool on it, like I am, and I'm not totally surprised by that. I think some folks are probably just more bought into the story, and because this is such a narrative, movie-like experience, it's like any kind of movie. It might be for you, and it might not. Another thing, though, that I will say before we hit the spoiler break is about replays. This game is designed for replays. When you first boot it up, the very first screen you see says something to the effect of no one path reveals all of the mystery or something like that. And so this game is designed for you to play it multiple times in order to see aspects of the story that might be hidden during various different playthroughs. And there's some
you really want to?
Yeah, so that's the thing. Games that are designed around that kind of replay or rewatch or what have you to explore other paths. The ones that I think of most with that is things like visual novels. And there's a sort of a table stakes in visual novels where, if you've done that, you have a fast forward function where you can...
Or maybe some multiple save slots.
Yes, or save slots or other things where you can play through the story and skip over material that you've already seen or read, right? And this game doesn't have anything like that. And it's really quite a while. I mean, it's not a very long game, but it's a roughly movie-length experience. And the really consequential choices happen mostly in the third act. So if you're going to play through this game multiple times in order to see everything that it has to offer and to reveal every detail of the mystery, if this really hooks you in that way, you're going to see a lot of that early game stuff multiple times. There are some choices, so you can take slightly different paths. So for example, there's a sort of an early mid-game choice where you have 3 choices about where to go during the day on one of Erica's days at this sort of mental institution, and you can interact with 3 different characters, and they're very different paths. But then, of course, that converges again, and it can feel a bit like I've just got to watch this movie again to see a different ending. I know what I want to choose in Act 3 to try something different, but I've got to go all the way through it again. And I found that really frustrating, and kind of ended up not finishing my second playthrough, even though I had some questions that were left unanswered. So that's the stuff that I'd say about it. I want to talk spoilers here, because I think it's that some of the issues I had with it are things that I can only discuss with a behind.
Well, Reagan, you are the host. It is up to you to toot the spoiler flute.
Okay, before we do the spoiler horn,
toot toot.
Yeah, no tooting, Shane. We've got to talk real quick about our Patreon. Listener, did you know that the short game is supported entirely by listeners like you on Patreon? You can go to www.theshortgame.net, or you can go to patreon.com/theshortgame, and you can support our show. And even $1 a month will, first of all, help us out quite a bit. We really appreciate the additional support. And it will get you access to our Discord, which is where we chat about the games that we're playing. That's where we plan the show. That is where we talk about total nonsense, like Fire Emblem or Crab. We're doing a Crab Week episode, by the way. It's coming up. Or all sorts of other total nonsense. So if you are interested in chatting with like-minded listeners and getting in on the planning side of the short game, come join us. Patreon.com/theshortgame is where to go. You can also find our show on the internet, www.theshortgame.net, where you'll find a contact form. That's a great way to let us know about things you think about the show or games that you think we should be covering, that sort of thing. We love to hear from you there. Or you can find us on Twitter @_shortgame. And you can find me also on Twitter @ReaganK. That's RayGank. Shane, where can people find you?
I'm over on Twitter @8bitshane.
Yeah, and Laura and Nate will be back next week once things have quieted down. So hopefully we'll be getting back to a more normal format soon. Thank you for sticking with us for this episode. And here it is, your spoiler break.
Toot toot.
So yeah, what do we actually think about the mystery here? Like, how interested or invested were you in the story, and what did you make of it?
I wasn't super into it, but I thought the cast was good. Like I said, I thought the lead actress was. They picked someone who is going to be. I'm not going to have, it's not going to irritate me while she's on screen, or while she's doing a lot of eyebrow acting. Mm-hmm. The story is really dreamy, if that makes sense. It's very it just sort of floats along. It's easy to feel like you're, from one moment to the next. Oh, now she's home, and now she's opening up a package with a hand in it. Now there's a police officer there. Now we're seeing some of her art. Now we're hearing a story from her father. Now we're hearing about these series of murders, and it just sort of floats and flows along in a kind of dreamy way. I think that's actually kind of an interesting style for it to take, but it also kind of never really has you settle into the reality of the moment, and to me kind of messes with some of the shock that they could maybe go for, like when you get to that first initial moment of oh, there's a hand in this box. It was is this real? I was already at the point of what is going on? Where is this? What is real here? And so even that, which seemed pretty real, didn't really have the weight that I guess it could have. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm with you. I was expecting more of a horror and I guess police story than what we ended up getting here. First of all, there were a lot of things about it that I just thought were like bad plotting that felt like the kind of thing you get on a television show where they don't really have the budget to have a large cast where they might potentially actually need one. So like weird stuff like, this killer is killing people associated with this asylum. The safest place for you will be at the asylum. And I, the only police officer in town, will protect you.
We'll protect you by wandering around the asylum in other places that you're not.
Yes. Yeah, we'll completely disappear for most of the story.
Investigate this dark asylum.
Yeah, and like also the asylum, which is a massive place and has apparently 3 patients.
Yes, very understaffed as well.
Yeah, like it's just an extraordinarily like it something about that made it feel cheap to me. Like there's ways to tell a story that's like a more restrained story designed for a small cast. This did not feel like a story designed for the size of cast that it had. And also just the pace of it, I thought was just wrong. I mean, the dreamy sort of nature of it that you mentioned was
While we're talking about things that felt cheap, it's painfully obvious what was shot on location and what was shot on a sound stage. Like they'll move from the asylum into one of the offices of the asylum, and like this office is like, oh, this is the sound stagiest place I've ever seen. Like there's one big wall that's painted a weird light bluish greenish color. And like, how do we decorate an office in an asylum? Well, let's put one bust of some unrecognizable Greek guy.
Yeah, and like one
on a pillar,
too small bookshelf
on a tiny bookshelf on a gigantic wall, and maybe a little potted plant over here as well. Yeah, that's it. That gives us a nice 2-level effect. All right.
Well, so that's where I was talking about this feeling like a British television show. British television shows, they're all this cheap. So it looks like a episode of Doctor Who or something, but like the really boring bits before you get to any of the sci-fi. I don't know. It's that kind of thing. And so it wasn't really winning me over from that perspective. And then really the thing that really bothered me about it was that the farther in that you get, the more, dreamy and is she crazy or is she not the story gets. And just nothing about it really worked for me. This is probably more of a matter of taste thing, but just like I wouldn't watch a movie that was like, if you cut the best bits of this together and even just cut out all of the weird like interaction stuff and just presented it as a film, I wouldn't watch this film. I just don't think it's a particularly interesting story. You're right that like they managed to get, I think, a really, really good central actor. The lead character, the lead actor who plays Erica is just great. She's really expressive, but like she only carried me about halfway through. And then I really started seeing the seams, and I just found the story confusing and like not particularly interesting. Like when the character who is now this is based on the one complete playthrough. I bailed out of my second playthrough. The character who killed Erica's father is sort of unmasked, and it's very unclear exactly what her goals are and if she's crazy. But like, okay, is she or isn't she crazy is like a mystery, but like it doesn't really solve the mystery of like, well, what actually happened? I don't know. It just, I'm sure there's details in some of these further playthroughs that would like clear up some of the mystery to me, but some of the mystery just sort of felt like, oh, like now these characters are doing things for reasons I don't understand. And that just lost me. Like I didn't understand what that woman, the person who killed the Erica's father, what her motivations were exactly. And I don't know. There was a lot about this that felt really kind of slapdash to me in terms of story.
We've all had the experience of watching a movie like that we really loved and watching it multiple times and seeing something new in it every time. And that's an experience that if you could recreate it in a game, I could see a lot of value in it. But this game kind of felt like they were trying to set it up and explicitly tell you up front, like, oh yeah, this is gonna be that. This is gonna be that thing where you watch it again and again, and of course you're literally gonna see different things in it every time, and you're gonna learn more and know more about the story. But like for that to work, you've gotta have real payoff on round one and really pull people along.
Yeah. Like you can't have the first playthrough just be full of gaping plot holes and confusing lack of motivation, and like you can't hide all of that stuff.
Oh, well, you didn't turn the right key or walk down the right hallway to fill in that plot hole.
I guess, yeah. And I found it confusing, unsatisfying. I thought the ending wasn't much of a payoff, I'll talk a little bit about the story of what came through in the playthrough that I had. So you're wandering around this completely unprotected, wandering around this madhouse, and meeting the various characters and trying to figure out who it is that mailed you this hand. Well, it turns out, of course, it is the lady that killed your father, and it's all related to her mother in some way. And a cult. So her father apparently, now this is something that I suppose there's the possibility that this is all in Erica's head, and I actually don't know. That's sort of one of the mysteries of the game, but that Erica is that the woman who killed Erica's father is trying to get revenge on him for killing other girls at this asylum that he ran. And the killings were about trying to do some sort of pagan ritual that involved seeing the future. So he was part of some sort of cult, and he ran this asylum kind of as a cover to get access to special women who it refers to as butterflies, who have the ability to look into flames and see the future in a very druidic kind of way. And so and this requires some sort of human sacrifice, and so he's doing that. And then, of course, in my playthrough, Erica, rejects. I don't know. I basically, every time somebody had the option to go with them or say no, I chose the no option. And so in my playthrough, this resulted in Erica sort of fleeing the mansion and burning it to the ground and saving the girls that were being abused there. That's pretty much the story from what I got. But I didn't really feel very satisfied. The murderer had incredibly unclear motivations to me and was a confusing character from jump. And I didn't think the ending was particularly satisfying. She sort of shoots her way out and burns the place down, and that's it. It's done. And no, the mystery of the cult was never really unraveled, and her mother was still a very mysterious figure that I didn't really understand exactly how she played into all of this. And I'm sure if I played through this game several more times, I would be able to unravel more of these details, but I kind of don't care to. I just sort of found the whole thing kind of a yawn. So that's sort of where I came down on it. It's not super great as a game, and it's not super great as a movie. And those two things didn't do a whole lot to reinforce each other. So, FMV games are back, baby.
FMV, you know what? I'm ready for that Night Trap 2. Bring it on. I want to save some co-eds from those vampires.
Honestly, I think I would rather play Night Trap than this. Night Trap is a silly, weird thing, and it's kind of too hard if I remember correctly. But
it's also, I mean, fun. I'm a little afraid to replay it because I'm pretty sure that Night Trap is canceled now. But
probably, yeah. Maybe. Okay, I'll stick to Double Switch.
Yeah, let's go with Double Switch. Debbie Harry. Corey
cancel
Haim.
Debbie Harry. She's grandfathered in.
Yeah. R.I.P. Corey Haim.
Oh, yeah. Well, listeners, thank you for sticking with us past the spoiler break. If you thought otherwise about this game, if you played this and really dug it, let me know. I'm really curious to chat with some folks because I'm frankly pretty confused by some of the fairly glowing reviews. I looked at Polygon's review and wow, they really liked it. And I
am less and less impressed these days with the review staff at Polygon's opinions on things. I used to find them to be very much simpatico with my own thoughts on games, but this is an example of kind of the latter day situation over there, where they seem to be really enthusiastic about stuff that just doesn't ring true for me.
I mean, that's just how reviews are. You have to go with the actual specific reviewers. An outlet like Polygon doesn't have opinions; people do, and so that's a thing. So I don't think there's anything to necessarily be said about Polygon as an outlet because of that. It's just this particular game. What? I don't get it. I don't get. I mean, and I feel like maybe this PlayStation made an arrangement to publish this game and then just sort of pushed it out as a surprise release without any marketing or press really outside of just it being part of their Gamescom presentation. And I kind of have to feel like maybe somebody decided that this really didn't need their full weight behind it, that they were kind of shoving it out to go and die, because it's just, I don't think it's anything particularly special. I was excited to play it and found it to be a bit of a disappointment, and I guess that's okay.
Yeah. I mean, they put it out at a pretty good price. I can't complain about that.
That's true. Can't complain there. It's $10 on the PSN. But yeah, I don't know. I'd like to see more games try this, but I'd like to see them try it differently for sure. I think maybe they need to rethink the little the lock and key and drawer and so on interactions. And I'd also love to see them sort of rethink,
here's our box quote for it. We want this, but good.
Yeah, that's actually exactly it. I personally think that if you were going to try this approach again, I would rather put most of the consequential choices near the end. I think that putting they felt, I think they needed to put a bunch of consequential choices up at the front, but they aren't really able to actually carry that through. And that meant that there was stuff that I felt like I was missing or otherwise couldn't really kind of get a grip on. And then for God's sake, let me skip right to the consequential choices. Let me watch the movie, make some choices, and then let me rewind and make those choices again. Because I am definitely not sitting through 2 hours of this game again, having to do swipes every second that I'm watching this movie. So I definitely can't, for example, do something else on my phone while I'm rewatching scenes I watched literally 2 hours ago. But there's no fast forward, and there's no way to skip to the consequential choices and try a different path. And that drove me nuts. So that's probably the biggest thing. If this game had given me more of an option to just try things without being kind of punished by watching this whole sequence of stuff again, then I probably would have done more of it. But yeah, that's...
I think one of the biggest lessons I've taken from playing what I think now is my favorite FMV game in our last episode in playing Telling Lies, and this, which is I'll just say not my favorite FMV game, is that the thing that I want from FMV games is I want to be able to fast forward. That's just it. Yeah, I think that alone would have made this game more replayable for me, and would have probably at the very least let me stick it out for at least one or two more endings. And I know there's stuff in those other endings that I think I might find interesting. So anyway, again, thank you listeners for sticking it out with us, and we'll be back with a more traditional format for the show next week. If you want to get in touch with us, you know where all the places are. You can find us on Patreon, you can find us on Discord, and you can find us on Twitter and elsewhere on the internet. Thank you so much once again for listening to The Short Game.